still fit for today's security challenges. And the general idea behind this, our gathering today, is to discuss the things that are dealing with the United Nations future, but not only with future United Nations, but the future of multilateralism in the broad sense of that meaning. And of course, especially having in mind the latest events that are related to the elections in, as I like to say to my American friends, in the most non-democratic country in the world, because it's not fair that only 200 million people make a decision about 7 billion of us or 7.5 billion of us, because their impact on the globe is so big that regardless of how many of them are making decisions, they are making decisions that are impacting all of us. And of course, I'm sure that today's discussion will be also done to a certain extent in an aura of latest events, especially because there is very big dynamics going on in multilateral sphere, and some initiatives that President-elect is launching already are showing that it will not be the same it used to be in the previous years when it comes at least to the United States. So the United Nations actually underpins the international order that we have known since 1945. And now, some 75 years later, we were having these discussions 2-3 years ago under the umbrella of NGIC very extensively. But COVID actually made these discussions even more important, because post-Corona era, post-COVID era that we are already entering slowly, but we are definitely not living in an era that was that we witnessed a year ago. Today, the world is completely different, and how it will look like it's not so visible today. In that context, multilateralism needs additional pushes and additional whys for multilateralism to be more efficient and effective are now underpinned with our reality of COVID, which shows that without global cooperation, we cannot tackle global problems, especially if we want to shape the world. We don't want to go back to the world was, because we wanted to change the world anyway. So now this is time maybe to not only to go back, to restart or to reboot the things, but rejuvenate, recreate, reinvent, and give some kind of new push for it. So in that context, the questions that we're talking about is the multilateral rules-based approach still the key to tackling global issues? Can we count on it? If yes, what are the prospects? If not, what should be done in order to go in that direction? Finally, how do we maintain and strengthen multilateralism in this rapid changing world? So with saying so, I would ask you, Abdulaziz, to take the first round of our discussion and to lift off. So Houston is giving you liftoff.
Thank you very much, my dear friend, and hello to everybody. I am really very optimistic. If the results of the final results of the American elections, go as we see right now, I think there will be a change in leadership. The United Nations need a leadership, and we have to admit and confess, all of us, that the United States plays the greatest role in making the United Nations function properly. And during the 4 past years, we witnessed a very strange diplomacy, strange decisions, strange direction that was taken by the administration, which added to the problems of not only the United Nations, but also to the other countries who are members in the Security Council. So I am very optimistic in 2021, maybe things will change. The announcements and the promises of President-elect Joe Biden encourages us, because he said that he will bring the United States back into the WHO. He will give attention to the United Nations, and he will join with other forces in the world to make sure that things will be conducted differently. This is a very important issue. Without it, we have seen the international arena blocked in rhetoric, in clashes, in meaningless positions that hindered peace and security, not only hindered it, but also it endangered peace and security in the world. There are many problems still need to be solved, which threaten peace and security in the world. The problem of Palestine, the problem in Syria, the problem in Libya, the problem in Yemen, Afghanistan. Luckily, the Nagorno-Karabakh is coming to close, and that will bring peace and security to the region as a whole. And I wish that all the nations of that region, especially the Azeri people and the Armenian people, will go back to normalize their relations and live in peace and cooperate to make their region a productive region, a safe region for themselves and for the world. Without a leadership, as I said, these problems that I have just mentioned, some of them, will be sources of danger, of threat to world peace and world security. Add to that the tendencies towards terrorism, extremism, Islamophobia, anti-Semitism, all these, ugly manifestations that should be eradicated, and people should go back to their normal human entity, human spirit, human existence, so they can cooperate and work and exchange benefits among themselves, away from hegemony and disrespect or insulting people's cultures and religions and belongingness. So this is how I look at the scene in the world, and I'm very optimistic if Mr. Trump goes home and Mr. Joe Biden takes over, and a new vision, new leadership will lead the world with the other powers in the world, and with us, also with them, in making our life in the future much better.
Thank you. Thank you, Abdulaziz. And Ambassador Moushira, you just joined us. Thank you very much. And very happy to see you with us. And of course, I was just mentioning that your traffic jam is making us be waiting for you, and very anxious to see and to hear what you're going to say about. But of course, you will later on join us with very concrete discussions. But now I would thanking Abdulaziz for you basically mentioning something which I didn't want to mention too many things, but I think it is very important that what you, Abdulaziz, were mentioning, what was happening. Of course, as you said, it's hopefully after us. The current or just recent war that was going on the territory of sovereign Republic of Azerbaijan because of Nagorno-Karabakh. And now Valdis and some of us were in previous, and Ameenah in previous discussions that were related to the things that were happening in Azerbaijan. And I have to mention this in this context, that the example of Azerbaijan is one of the examples that what we have to take care about in the future when we talk about new multilateralism in the context of respecting of international law. I won't mention other things, but I will just mention what we underlined, all of us, in discussions that we had when we were discussing about Nagorno-Karabakh and the crisis in Azerbaijan related to the events that were behind us at this stage. But as Valdis was, I remember Valdis was the first one who raised up among us the issue of Azerbaijan and Nagorno-Karabakh as part of the sovereign Republic of Azerbaijan, keeping their territorial integrity intact according to United Nations resolutions, Security Council and General Assembly resolutions of the United States. And practically what we were witnessing in previous decades was clear signal of disrespect of international order that is done under the umbrella of not only just UN appeals, but under Security Council, very clear resolutions and decisions that we're talking about, basically speaking, part of Azerbaijan being under occupation. So having said so, and also speaking about your optimism is based on the fact that we're expecting that we have new inhabitant in January in White House. But at the same time, I think it would be good that we also have some thoughts about the Trump may be leaving from the White House, but he's not leaving from the scene. And what is even more evident, that Trump's America is still there. And that is something which we have to take in consideration, because we all know that this great country was never so divided like it was divided in the last 4 years. And we saw that there is great divide in America, and that great divide is Trump and non-Trump America so visible. And we hope that I think that we have to take that into consideration when we are talking about the future of multilateralism. But having said so, Francis, today I saw Daily Mail that Trump had, President-elect Biden had a 20 minutes discussion with Prime Minister Johnson. And one of the places that he mentioned in their discussion that was mentioned, of course, he was mentioning the things that we expected, like climate change, like Paris Agreement, and rejuvenating of the Euro-Atlantic structures, common approach of UK, EU, and United States in actually shaping this Euro-Atlantic space, in NATO in particular. And also he was mentioning parts, the only 3 countries out of that usual suspects agenda issues were Ukraine, Western Balkan, and Ireland. And of course, Ireland in positive context. So I think that we are witnessing the real change and shift of the priorities of the new American administration. So having said so, Francis, I'm really very glad to see you in such a good shape. And please, could you take a lift up?
Thank you very much, Zlatko. I'm just down the road in Vračar in Beograd. No, I think that we all expected, I mean, we Irish, all expected that Biden would weigh on the question of Brexit follow-up and the extent to which Britain, the government of Boris Johnson, would actually adhere to its international commitments on Northern Ireland. Because apart from the fact that Northern Ireland is still part of the island of Ireland, it is a part of the United Kingdom, of course, but its governance is governed by an international treaty today, which Britain has adhered to. And that makes it a little bit different from most provinces or regions of most countries. And the importance of that is that no change can take place to the status of Northern Ireland within the UK or within or outside the UK without the consent of the majority of the people in Northern Ireland. And so that is the basic thing which is at stake here in terms of the follow-up on Brexit. And this is what we call the Good Friday Agreement. So it's very important that Joe Biden, who actually has some Irish ancestry, like an increasing number of American presidents these days, except Mr. Trump, it's sort of very understandable that he would weigh in on that thing. But if we can come back to, I think, the question of multilateralism, I think that Abdulaziz was absolutely correct, and yourself too, in putting the importance back on this fundamental issue for our global governance, and the fact that the incoming president-elect Biden is singing a song that I think we're all, one that has been under a great stress in recent years. But let us not make too much importance out of a shift in perspective on the American side, because I think that there has been a sufficient degree of consistency within the international community as such for us to recognize that one of the greatest success of the past 75 years is the fact that we have had an enormous growth in the body of international law, in the governance of the global commons. We would not have international telecommunications today, nor air travel, nor maritime predictability, nor peacekeeping without the United Nations having played a fundamental role. So from that point of view, there's an awful lot that's positive. But the UN is not fit for today's security challenges, in answer to the theme of our topic. But I would say it never was. It's not even at its foundation. And the main problem is the UN Security Council, designed as a compromise between imperial powers, biased by veto against the majority of the council itself, let alone the General Assembly. So how can it be even considered democratic in any real sense? It's inherently undemocratic to begin with. And like most of its members, democracy is in decline worldwide over the past 14 years. So the rest of the UN, I have no problem with, having spent most of my working life working within it. But the Security Council is a framework, it's a chamber, it's a place where the big five, more than anybody else, can agree. And it's no more than that. When they agree, it empowers them enormously, phenomenally, to impose their will on the rest of us. And when they can't agree, the rest of us suffer. And what do we need to do to change that? I mean, one can talk about changing the composition of the Security Council, and there has been this debate about going from 15 members to 22, making India a permanent member, which is a well-argued position that China still obstructs. But I think the question is the veto. What should we do with the veto? I would prefer to see it abolished, but it should become perhaps a qualified veto, that it only is valid if 2 or 3 of the big 5 countries agree on wielding the veto. For one single country to be able to, as it were, be a single spoiler of global security is completely unacceptable. It was always unacceptable, but we've lived with that. I mean, and one of the greatest failures of that fundamentally flawed Security Council is the fact that even when they could agree on the measures, they often didn't follow through. Now, of course, we have the frustration with Azerbaijan's situation and at least 4 resolutions that Armenia ignored. But look at the occupation of northern Cyprus. And even more importantly, look at the Palestinian situation. I mean, the Palestinians are perhaps the most betrayed people in the world today. And I say this knowing full well that unfortunately and tragically, Saeb Erekat has just passed away, and he is due, I think, great homage as a really significant statesman. I hadn't even realized that he's younger than me, and that makes it even all the more, I think, personally unfortunate, tragic in his case. But I think that, you know, we have to do something about the whole question of the Palestinians, their rights and international recognition. They need to be able to live in peace and security. And the greatest failure, I think, of the UN is to have failed to deliver on that. Of course, we have avoided World War III, but we haven't avoided a lot of regional wars. And I have to say, as Rovshan knows, I'm quite optimistic about what is happening now with Nagorno-Karabakh. In fact, I shared some considerations with him last night, and I'm hoping that, you know, the Security Council will seize this issue of Nagorno-Karabakh and somehow ensure that the dispensation towards the governance of that part of it is one that is multilaterally inclusive in the UN sense, and not just left up to a Russian occupation of territory, or for that matter, anybody else's. And that it should be something which the international community can weigh in on and give legitimacy to whatever measures are put in place to secure the human rights of all the communities there, the minorities included as well as the majorities. So having said that, I think we have a huge amount of things to do in multilateralism. I would say that we can no longer depend, and I will end on this, exclusively on member states to be the only show in town in the UN. We have a vastly bigger United Nations today than we had 75 years ago. But more importantly, we have increasingly empowered populations and communities that through social media and through active civil societies can play fundamentally important roles. But in order for them to do so, we need to have freedom of the media. And in order to have effective independent freedom of the media, we need to deal with market concentration, where a few players like Rupert Murdoch dominate the whole scene. We have to break up the monopolies in these areas, and therefore we need some sort of national, if not international, regulation of big commerce, big corporations, corporatism, so that we allow free enterprise to thrive. And I would hope that Joe Biden would pick up on one of the important reports that his predecessor, Barack Obama, had in April 2016, when the Council of Economic Advisors for the White House under the Obama era had produced an extremely important report on the benefits of competition. Essentially, it was highlighting the risks to competition and freedom, fundamental freedoms of market concentration, when the big fish eat the small fish and you end up with oligopolistic, if not monopolistic situations. This is a global problem, not just an American problem. And I think the answer to it will underpin the success of our democracies in the future and the extent to which multilateralism itself will reflect the wills of the people. Thank you.
Okay, I'm sorry, I muted myself with the potential noise, so I started speaking without demuting myself. So thank you, Francis. Thank you very much. I mean, you really tackled the key challenges and key issues. I mean, the structure of the Security Council is one of the, and probably that's, you know, the question is how, I mean, who in a history gave up its power without being pressed to give up its power? So, I mean, how we can expect, you know, that countries who, in order to make a decision, to make a structure of the Security Council, which is giving up power of the P5, any one of them, requires 5 of them being in consensus.
Yep.
So that itself is kind of tricky question. I mean, but I think that you underline very, very important issue that is sometimes behind the horizon for us, which is so many multilateral institution structures, from maritime ones, telecommunications ones, that we just keep forgetting that they exist, and they function very, very efficient and effectively, from UNESCO, from WHO, World Food Program, and so on and so on. Of course, none of them are perfect, but I mean, the world would be significantly more imperfect without them. So maybe you really open very. So having said so, Ameenah, I would ask you to take the floor. I'm always with very big enthusiasm waiting to hear your thoughts.
Thank you so much, Zlatko, and I follow up on what has been said just now about the theme of our discussion today, which is the UN still fit for purpose at 75? And as we know that the UN system has come, of course, to exist in the ashes of the Second World War. And we all agree that I think we all agree with what has been said of the good work that has been done by the multilateral system, UNESCO, WHO, and World Food Programme, and all the rest of it. But the thorny issue remains with the Security Council. And I come to the Security Council with the recent pandemic that we've had. And this is something I feel that should have been taken up as an emergency with the Security Council. And this has not been done. And we have seen the damage that this has happened, because we saw the Ebola crisis coming up at the UN Security Council as being a very important issue for maintaining, of course, peace and security across the globe. And this, of course, was tackled rightly so at that moment in time. Now, to come back to whether the UN is still relevant at 75 for our security, I also agree that it is no longer the case. We have to really rethink of the 5 member countries that are there. And we have seen as well that over the past 75 years, the world order has changed. And I think, to me, the biggest change in the world order happened when the Berlin Wall went down. This is when we saw the United States from then on acting as a hegemonic power, and we no longer had the bipolar world that existed when Russia was there. So the fall of the Berlin Wall constituted a major landscape shift in the world order as we have seen it. So the United States started enjoying being, of course, the unipolar force that it was. And then when we had, of course, the space of globalization, we saw how China emerged. And I think the elephant in the room everywhere across the globe, in all discussion in the multilateral system, is that we fail to see the elephant in the room. And the elephant in the room is China. And we have to reckon with what China brings to bear in the world order, because we have seen recently, of course, the major debate whether 5G should be launched, rolled out across the world, because we know that the challenge, the United States fear, is that they will lose this grip on this particular aspect of technology, and which we know that China is well ahead. So China remains the elephant in the room. And now, can we look at the world, the United Nations Security Council, without India, without countries like Indonesia, without even Iran, because Iran is a very big economy? Essentially, when we look at the world order, when we look at the UN Security Council, we cannot obviate Asia as an emerging continent. And of course, I come from the African continent. Unfortunately, 70% of the UN Security Council agenda revolves around Africa, and Africa is absent. So again, how do we posit African agenda at the UN Security Council is something we have to address. Now, to come up with the issue of giving a power, yes, the countries are not going to give up power easily. But having said this, we really need to relook at the capitalist base that these countries in the Security Council as we speak, how they stand. And we find that China has emerged, is now number 2. After 1945, we had the UK, was of course number 2 in the balance of power because of the sheer weight of the economy. Now UK, whether UK should still be at number 2, I think China should move up. I think we need to learn from the lessons of the Bretton Woods Agreement when they had weighted voting. And we know that at the present time, one of the weaknesses of the UN system is that each country has 1 vote. Now, how can we compare a country of 1.2 billion like China to Mauritius, which is 1.2 million? I mean, it just doesn't make sense. So this has to be relooked at, not population-wise, but of course, economy-wise. And this is when one of the major transformation of the UN Security Council will happen when we flag this into the picture. Now, the other thing that the Bretton Woods institutions taught us is that the convening power, I mean, they could bring the belligerents to the same table because they were talking money. So money flows. And this was when they could bring all the belligerents to the thing. And the third point I would like to bring is what the Bretton Woods institution taught us, is how they took decision fast and made it happen. And they could roll out this decision very, very quickly. So if we take these 3 points in terms of relooking at the UN at 75, I think there is a cause for rethinking. There is a cause to look at the world as a multipolar world. Yes, we have now a much more, I'm not going to say convenient, but at least somebody, a very serious interlocutor in the White House. But this interlocutor at the White House will have to look at all the other players, all the multipolar world we're talking about, and really look at them as partners. Because the fight we've seen between China and the United States over the past 2-3 years is not sustainable. But I can see that happening with other emerging powers if we still have the populist movement, which, as Francis has said, is still very present in the United States. The United States is still a very divided country ideologically, and they are here to stay, and we have to address this. Populism is rising everywhere in the world, and this is something that we have to look at. We have to really look at globalization. Globalization has been very good, but now it's something to rethink. Do we maintain the world order through the lens of globalization, through the lens of maintaining the superpower at the stand? I mean, this is something that we'll have to wake up to as we emerge from COVID. So this is my take on this. So I'll take a step back. Thank you.
Thank you, Ameenah, so much. And I would like to call Moushira, if you are with us. Thank you so much for joining us. And since Ameenah made the really great introduction to overall issue of Africa and all the way up to the Egypt as a country that is connecting not only Africa with the rest of the world, but is actually the connecting so many different nodes of the very challenging parts of the world. So could you please give us your first remarks?
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Zlatko, for having me, and sorry for the jam. It was not a traffic jam, it was a computer jam. My laptop simply decided to update now, and I was at a loss, really. I didn't know what to do. It's a great honor to join this fantastic minds. I want to add my voice to what President Ameenah just said, and I will pick up on this. And I, of course, agree with Ambassador Francis on what he said about the veto. And this brings me to what Mr. Abdulaziz Altwaijri mentioned, and I fully echo every single word he said. with one exception. I don't know if I am as optimistic as he is. We're very happy to see Mr. Biden at the White House, and we're hoping to see American leadership of our multilateralism, because we need our multilateralism more than ever. But COVID-19 has shown us that our world has changed. And we have seen how the Security Council was terribly inept in dealing with the pandemic. And this really calls for action. I won't repeat what was said, but contrary to popular belief, the UN does have options. Number one, Article 99 of the Charter of the UN on the mandate of the UN Security Council. We want to use it more often. The Secretary General should be able to draw the attention of the Security Council to issues. If the Security Council fail to see it, as it happened with COVID-19. And I agree with Madam Ameenah when she mentioned Ebola and the reaction of the Security Council then. And before Ebola in 2000, the HIV and AIDS. We've seen prompt action in cooperation with the American administration. This, of course, gives us reason to be optimistic, as Mr. Altwaijri said, but we have to reconsider Article 99. The other option is the Uniting for Peace resolution. And we need to use the Uniting for Peace resolution more often when the Security Council is unable to perform its duties because of the lack of consensus among the big five. Then the General Assembly must be empowered to act, and its resolutions carry the same weight like that of the Security Council. I want to add one more point really, which is the need to revisit our charter, and we need to reconsider the definition of threats to international peace and security with today's realities, which is completely different from 76 or 75 years ago. We need to look at pandemics, we need to look at climate change, and we need to look at demographics. These three issues or crises are now, they have proven to be threats to international peace and security, and the Security Council must act. We have an urgent need to consider the fair and just distribution of the vaccines, and to ensure that the vaccines will reach the most vulnerable countries and the most vulnerable groups within countries, be it developed or underdeveloped. So we have to wait and look and hopefully push to make the optimism of Mr. Altwaijri a reality. As Ambassador Francis spoke, he said that Trump didn't leave, and this is a problem. But it's fascinating to see how the American democracy functions under the abnormality. Exactly like COVID-19 proved that our normal is no longer the normal. So the question now is, how can the General Assembly, how can our countries, we all belong to the group of 77, maybe some countries will be with Group B or Western European countries, but we all have vested interests. Look at our part of the region, of the world, our region. We have, it's a calamity, the situation in Yemen, in Libya. Look at Africa, look at the Syria, a big, strong country. Now we talk about Syrian refugees. This is a loss to humanity, not to Syria, not to the Arab world. The Palestinian issue, the conflict. Are we happy now with Mr. Trump giving a blow to international legitimacy and the hard-fought resolutions of the UN? They are all wiped out. simply recognized Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, recognized the sovereignty of Israel over the Golan Heights, so on and so forth. And people are clapping because more Arab countries are having peace deals with Israel. What about the Palestinian people? Will they take it for granted and sit quiet? Or we have more threats than ever? The world is changing, and we have become a global village because of the digital revolution. It's more dangerous than ever, and we have to act. And truly, the room in the elephant is not China, but the Security Council. And the Security Council must reflect the realities of today. What you said about India, what you said about many countries. I mean, look at Africa. Who will represent Africa? We have to put our heads together, and I hope that the new American administration will really act quick to support multilateralism. The WHO needs support. I mean, Trump dropped the WHO at the height of a pandemic. Is this a responsible approach or a responsible action from the superpower? These are all questions that the United Nations must deal with it, and deal with it, put aside politics, and look at the change, the influx of refugees. This is a threat to international peace and security, and no one is doing anything to it. We have to stop conflict. The call of UN Secretary General Guterres on the 26th of March of this year to put down arms, global ceasefire, fire, and focus on the real problem of our life, COVID-19. It took the Security Council till July to react, and the reaction was lame. It was not, they put a lot of exceptions and caveats on the ceasefire. It was really useless. And I stop here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Moushira, very much. Valdis, now it's your turn. I mean, I think you should, besides what you already thought they were going to say, you have to reflect to the things that were put here on the table, because I mean, there are so many things that I know you already, I was watching how you were resonating without saying anything when you heard some of those, how we can make some kind of balance in between these big powers and big players, let's say, next moves, if they're supposed to give up something which they already have. Do we have to, can we make it just by preaching that it is moral, that is not fair, or we can somehow create the culture and create some kind of push and pressure, as we like to say, create some kind of alliance of like-minded entities, peoples, individual organizations, like we are NGIC trying to be a platform for putting the pressure on key players, how they can, basically speaking, realize that it is in their interest to have inclusiveness in global scene, to include everyone, and that those global problems that we are facing are not going to be so easy. So you personally are one of the signatures, just referring to two letters that with Rovshan's network we participated in. One that was with Gordon Brown letter that was basically saying, focusing on the point that about $5 trillion that were released by developed countries, help their economies, just in first 3-4 months of the pandemic, showed that there is a potential in financial sense. And we used in that letter example that only $1 trillion out of those 5 would be enough to direct for developing countries and to marginalized groups to quickly actually transform and fulfill the SDGs in areas that are dealing with health, with water supply, with education, with child abuses, and all those major points that are actually now lacking of financing. We also were pointing out that when vaccine time comes, we were asking for people's vaccine, together with over 100 people from different parts of the world, and current and previous leaders, Nobel laureates. Are we going to witness that in the near future, when we have new vaccine? Will we be able to, through multilateral channels, rejuvenated multilateralism, will we be able to really come that every person in this world gets vaccine? Because it's in my interest, as someone who can afford vaccine, that people who live across the street on a neighboring country can get it for free, because if they don't get it for free, they won't have it, and I will be infected in the end. Can we somehow spread this spirit? And I know that I gave you too many questions, I mean, for what you already wanted to say, but I just wanted to pick your brain, I mean, in this direction, because I'm always eager to listen to your thoughts about this. So please, take a screen, not the floor.
Thank you, Zlatko. Well, a long introduction, a lot of questions, but I'll start with a basic question, do we need UN? And the answer is 100% yes, we do. The next question, how UN is doing? Are we satisfied? Yes, we must be satisfied, but we are not satisfied. UN is functioning pretty well according to the tasks that was given 75 years ago. The balance between the Security Council's permanent members is kept, and let's say we have peace and not war between these big players, so it's that we call big powers. The next question is, do UN needs a change? And again, the answer is yes, a lot of yes answers, because the time has changed, the situation globally has changed, and let's say we need new tools. So do we need a new vision for the change? Yes, we need, again, yes. But the most important task to my mind is that we see UN now today as a representative organization of nations, but not a leading organization of nations, not a leading nation who guides the solution of global problems. Because we have to use the word global, and UN must become a global organization of leadership. So who can trigger it? Who can start it? Who can create this? Who can get ideas how to make these things happen? We in our group have some ideas, but we don't have enough, let's say, leverage to implement them. Let's start with the big powers. And what we see today with the big powers is pretty pessimistic. It's not only about the US. When you have seen the slogan, let's make America great again, was just propaganda working inside, but very damaging in US international image. And now we have to really hope that the Joe Biden will let's say, recreate the make America great again in globally in international affairs. It's a very difficult task because Trump has created a lot of damage. And post-Trump America is a question which is not easily to be answered. But at the same time, this is an example. If you go focus only on competition, on your selfish interests, it ends up very quickly in 4 years in a great damage in the overall landscape. And it's very typical, let's say, for the relationship between the big powers, what we see in the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict. The Minsk group didn't action. Russia takes the chance. And let's say Russia's attitude towards France and Turkey, nothing to say America because America is busy itself, was just, we can do it alone. We don't care about what you think. We don't care about your interests. We don't care about, let's say, regional interests. We just care about our own interests. They don't say, let's make Russia first, but they act according to that principle. And the question out is the outcome. We see, the outcome is, and the outcome reaction after this peace agreement is a very interesting one. France's reaction is, please protect Armenian rights, minority rights. Turkey's reaction, because they are a little bit, ashamed about this. We are going to protect with Russia. Russia doesn't say that the Turkey will be involved. So, and the most worst thing with what happened we had an illegal, internationally illegal presence of foreign troops on Karabakh, which is Azerbaijani territory. Today, we have in a one day, overnight, we have an absolutely different situation. We have absolutely internationally legitimate presence of foreign troops in Karabakh. And of course, we may say this is a big step forward to the solution, but then we have to discuss immediately what will be the next steps. But this example shows that the big powers of the Security Council, they don't care about each other. To say that they are not going to collaborate on global affairs, and nothing to say that they are really fighting against each other. What we can do, what's left? G20. G20 is also dominated by the G7. We have to accept it, but it might be a force. So, and what's left after G20? This is a big number of medium, small states. And how we can implement the multilateralism in United Nations if we can't implement the multilateralism approach on regional affairs? Okay, I'm always saying that I am lucky, you know. We have Baltic cooperation, we have Baltic Nordic cooperation of 8 states. That's real multilateralism, talking to each other, trying to find the ways we can collaborate. But now I'll ask a devil's advocate's question. Can you imagine China, Japan, Korea, and India collaborating together? I'm not talking about the security issues. I'm talking about the people-to-people level. I'm talking about the real cooperation and science real cooperation. And we have to admit, and I fully agree, that they are more than just 5, 6 big powers. Today we have India, and I always mention Iran, as was mentioned before. We have Brazil and we have Mexico. Can you imagine, you know, good multilateral relationship between Mexico and the United States? And there is a very interesting data. On a country rating, how do you evaluate the other country's image? For Mexicans, the US on the 50th place. That's a neighbor, that's the biggest economic partner, and that's not because of business, it's because of action of definite leaders. And therefore, I have to say, we have to work on regional implementation of the multilateral principles on the regional level. And there are more challenging regions and there are less challenging regions. We can work it in Africa, I'm really sure. And we can work it in, let's say, in Caucasus, which is difficult, but it will be of very great value. And that's the role of organizations that ours are. We try to talk to the people, not only to the leaders, to explain what are the advantages of living in cooperation and making decisions multilaterally. That means respecting everybody's interests and rights. Is it possible? My friend wrote a book about this process, Simon Alcott, he's British. And he said it's possible in 2 generations if we start to act today. That's my wish for all our nice company and as well as the rest of the world.
Wow, thank you, Valdis. I mean, you hit us like tsunami with, I mean, more another questions. I mean, another topics. So before I would ask you, Rovshan, if you could just not only give us your thoughts about this topic that we're having here today, because I mean, you participated in more NGIC meetings of this nature than any one of us. And you really are someone who is getting more and more experienced, and sometimes more experienced than us with things that I experienced. But I would also ask you if you can brief us a little bit to put this topic in the context of Nagorno-Karabakh and bring us some enlightening ideas about what is the state of the state when it comes to the latest events in Nagorno-Karabakh and what we can expect and what we can do and what we should promote as a way forward.
Actually, all day yesterday, and I've been talking with President Zatlers and Ambassador Franz O'Donnell about the situation and what can be done and what's what's the role, because in sometimes not to be seen that, you know, we just left from one occupant and there is another one stepped in. But today we had a good news. It's not official, but it's on media that Turkey and Russia signed a joint agreement to have a joint control and monitoring center on peacekeeping. But in the same time, we have now France is made a statement that France is not accepting. They are not accepting the agreement because as a part of the Minsk group, they not being in part of this negotiations. And America, I think next week, Secretary of US is coming to the region today because the president of Georgia announced it. And that's why it's going to be quite interesting. But in terms of Azerbaijan, we got already, like, you know, biggest part of the territories back. And with economy, with possibilities, I'm sure, like, you know, it will be quite good. I mean, like, you know, development. But how it's good, because there is no status so far yet well known about what's going to happen with the other parts. Because 5 years, and this 5 years can be lasted another 5 years, and that 5 years can be lasted another 5 years. People are happy and they are excited. I mean, yesterday they were like, you know, celebrations 24 hours. I mean, no one cared about COVID, but everyone was celebrating it. And it brought back, you know, huge, you know, mentally strong feelings. And so far, as President Zatlers said, like, you know, we have to see, to wait a couple more days and then accordingly to plan our activities. But I think that definitely we have, as we talked yesterday with Ambassador Chikuta, we have to think about holding not one conference, but one-day conference. And for sure, like, you know, to have our president giving a speech.
Well, thank you. I mean, Rovshan, I think that it is good that we as NGIC keep really involved more and more in every aspect of that, meaning in our capacity as a platform for discussions about, basically speaking, how the world should look better like in time that is in front of us. And one of the I personally am coming from the part of the world that was that is not important to be very important, because we're in a mess, because we're in a clashing between big powers where we are submitted to the proxy wars, if I can put it that way. We witnessed actually one old system just after, as you mentioned, when the Berlin Wall fell down, we thought Fukuyama was telling us that we are witnessing the end of the history, but we're actually witnessing the beginning of a completely new world, not the end of history. Then we entered into the third millennium, and we thought that we are living in a new era, which was called third millennium. Just months after we entered the new era, we got hit by 9/11. And then we realized that we are sweeping actually in a completely new world, because actually the post 9/11 world is significantly different than the previous one. And we were debating and discussing about needs of the rejuvenating United Nations and multilateralism, and then COVID hit us. So in the last 2 decades, we practically lived in 3 different eras. Too much for one lifetime to be living in 3 eras. So Ameenah, I mean, I would like to ask you to let's say, get in with this.
Yes.
I provoked you, basically, because I know you're doing the rest.
Yeah, I'll just make a few remarks on what has been said, and it's a pity I have to leave a bit earlier because I would have loved to stay till the very end. It's a fascinating discussion. I think what you have done is really, as moderator, you have really summed up very nicely, Zlatko, all the essential point. But just before I leave, there's something that I would just like to touch on what Valdis has said in terms of whether, for example, Mexico can work with Asian countries, India, China, and all the others. I think the approach that Asia is adopting, this is again what I'm saying with groups like the ASEAN group, for example, and all the blocks which are coming up out in Asia, is the approach is slightly different. We don't see the hegemonic approach in Asia. We are seeing more integration of various countries to trade. And so each one is kind of maintaining their own identity, their own way of doing things, but I think compromising when it comes to issue of mobility of, all that we have talked about in terms of goods, services, and people. And I think that if we look at, for example, how Vietnam reacted when China was trying to be hegemonic, they stood up and they said, look, we have our culture, we have the way of doing things, and that's the way we want to do things. So I think this approach, which I think really is different from what we have seen after the Second World War in terms of the hegemony we have seen rising. And of course, we lived through the Cold War. I think the approach we are witnessing in Asia, of course, this of course stands up to a certain point until of course things change again. But what we have seen over the past few years is the emergence of trade as being the vehicle through which integration is happening more and more. So hegemony may not be on the agenda so much, but more trade and improving the livelihoods of people through what trade can bring. And this is something that Africa is taking on board through the Africa Free Trade Agreement. And we see that as a very important vehicle for seeing the building up of a 1.2 billion market, and of course for the good of the continent, because I think there's so much more that unites us than divides us. So that's my take, and I have to apologize and take leave. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Ameenah, very, very much. And of course, we just started the second round in reflections, and we basically speaking out of those three bullets or three items that we had in our invitation letter about United Nations. It does United Nations underpins the international order that we know since 1945. The second one is multilateral rule-based approach, still the key to tackling global issues. I think we've covered these two things very clearly. As Valdis said, are United Nations needed? Yes, they are. Are they perfect? No, they are not. Do they need rejuvenated, I call it rejuvenated, or restructured, or recreated, or reinvented, or upgraded to the next level of the needs of the state of the state? Yes, it is, but we have no alternative. It's just like democracy. It's not perfect, but nothing better was invented yet. So UN is not perfect, but nothing better was invented yet. So we have to see how we can upgrade it. With this populism that are flourishing, over flooding the world, we see that democracy, even very mature democracies, are under attack and jeopardized. So as democracy and multilateralism, they have to get another speed. The world that we live in require us to get to the next level. But the third item and the third bullet, how do we maintain and strengthen multilateralism in this rapidly changing world? I would just ask if we can take the second round with maybe having 2, 3, 4 bullets or ideas, what should be done? Or either global players, or it doesn't have to be big. What is the role of universities, academia, and so on? Moushira, you would like to lift off, right?
Okay, bye.
Thank you very much. Bye. Thank you very much. I just want now at this time, when we are trying to be optimistic, we have to get down and look at the Charter of the UN and how we can amend, even if the elephant in the room will continue to be the elephant in the room, at least we have to reflect today's realities in the Charter of the United Nations. Otherwise, people will move away from this organization, which has not really, fulfilled the needs of the people. The United Nations was established for the people, we the people. Now it has turned into meetings at the headquarters, and reality on the ground at the national and subnational level, dismal. But we have to focus at real achievement on the ground. I mentioned the refugees, the conflicts, and the forced displacement of people, ethnic cleansing, so on and so forth, the impact of climate change. All of this is I mean, the UN is not doing anything to it. Political jargon, imported language from one declaration to another declaration, bulky words pregnant with gaps and wide interpretation. We are abusing the very limited resources of the United Nations. Look at the problem of education globally. What have we done globally to improve the quality of education? I'm not talking about the US or Denmark or Norway. I'm looking at countries pregnant with population explosion, and the poor are not getting any education. And the poor are getting poorer, and the vulnerable are getting more vulnerable. And the problems are no longer confined within the national territories. It has become porous. Boundaries have become porous. So we have to revisit the Charter of the United Nations for the best interest of humanity, not political interest of superpowers or semi-superpowers or whatever. We have to deal with today's realities. Thank you. I want to know when we will finish, because I don't know the time. I really need to go.
We will be we'll be finishing in about 15 minutes, as soon as we get to the second round. So I would ask Francis. Now we go to Europe, right? After we were in southern Mediterranean, or in North Africa. Let's go back to Europe, and then Abdulaziz. I hope you will follow this, and of course, Valdis, you will be giving us final remarks before we actually, Rovshan and myself, we just give you some concluding thoughts. But so, and if you don't mind, my battery is leaking out, and I have to find out where's I may get out of the screen for a minute, or I will call someone here and mute myself to get the charger, because I hope I will not be unplugged from the electricity in here. So Moushira, I'm getting back to your problems that you had. So I hope I won't get it that way. Francis, please, would you take the floor?
Thank you very much. I think you mentioned Europe, and the first thing that comes to my mind is the European Union and the Schuman Declaration way back so many decades ago. I mean, one of the great things about the coal and steel community was this whole question of trade and bringing France and Germany together, and upon that was built the European Economic Community, and today we have the European Union, with the Copenhagen criteria underpinning a common set of values across that much of the continent of Europe. Of course, the Council of Europe is so much bigger and much more inclusive. But I think one of the key issues of the European integration process is, of course, the whole question of trade, communication, and the fundamental freedoms. And I would say subsidiarity is another important element of that we actually allow decisions affecting communities to be made at the most local and appropriate level possible, rather than accumulating too much power at the top. There is this whole question of subsidiarity. And that is, to some extent, what we have in the UN when we think of the regional and the national levels. But to come back to the point that Ambassador Moushira was saying, I think we have a global agenda which we agreed some time ago, 20 years ago now, at the Millennium Declaration, and it was reformed again with the Sustainable Development Goals. We, unfortunately, as Mark Malloch-Brown recently said, quoting perhaps Bill Gates, we have lost 25 to 30 years worth of global development in 25 to 30 weeks of COVID, depending on when you're making this statement. I would say 30. This is the biggest tragedy we face today in the world, with 400 million people unemployed because of the COVID pandemic. And how do we get back on track with the Sustainable Development Goals, which cover these issues, education, health, and so on and so forth. So I see the SDGs, as it were, the Sustainable Development Goals, to be fundamentally important in getting us back on track. And this gets us to the question of public finance, because obviously we need governments to be able to finance recovery. And there I would say what I've said in previous conversations, we have to start looking differently at the whole question of national deficits and the way public finances are run. We have for the first time, we have for the past 30 years had the lowest interest rates in the world. It is possible today to borrow a lot of money with very little obligation, or let's say burden in terms of interest over the longer term. And the best way to do this is perhaps the way the EU has done it, with the mutualization of that debt through its recent special fund. But the other thing that was raised, I think very correctly by Ismail Sergeldin, was why don't we have special SDRs from the Bretton Woods institution, the IMF, for COVID recovery? And as I understood it at the time from Ismail, it was in fact the United States that at that point had been obstructing that. So perhaps the Biden incoming administration will be able to look at this question of special SDRs that could be allowing the poorest of the poor countries to tackle the challenge of the SDGs. Thank you.
Thank you, Francis. I was muted. I fixed my charger problem, so I won't have that as a problem at least. So Abdulaziz, I think I would like you to take a floor, and especially, I mean, Francis, you really mentioned very important issues, actually about Bretton Woods structures, generally speaking, and what Ismail was referring to. It's very fundamental changes of how we operate as a world, especially because we saw that, I mean, when the big players want to pump into their businesses the money, they just simply do it. And that's it. I mean, so sooner or later, someone else will pay. The only problem is the ones that should pay, on the end, with this flooding over, will be the ones who have who have no capacity to pay. And then everything, overall system may collapse, because on the end of the day, if there is no one to let's say, close the global value chain, if some links are missing, then the overall chain is going simply just to disintegrate. So I think it is, and as Moushira, really, I mean, I understand, and I know that Moushira is very much, let's say, related to the Millennium Goals and to the work of late Boutros Boutros, the great person of one of the greatest multilateralism persons of the last in the history of the United Nations. And of course, that's what I think we have to see how we can go back, how we can use this COVID and this crisis of multilateralism to actually re-engineer or actually re-energize SDGs, because there is no better plan. SDGs are just like United Nations. They are not perfect, but there's nothing better invented. And so much intellectual energy and political energy was pushed in that, basically speaking, we should see how we can re-energize it, how we can actually maybe use this COVID crisis to put back on agenda, not only climate change, but overall SDGs, hitting the very core of the SDGs, which is education, and us being smarter, if not us, then new generations at least. So Abdulaziz, since you're coming from with the ISESCO background, I'm absolutely sure that you can give us a lot thoughts about soft power, how we can have a soft power of multilateralism being more reality.
Thank you very much, my friend. I want to clarify the issue of my optimism. I'm optimistic because I based my optimism on the comparison between Mr. Trump and Mr. Biden. Trump, who came from business circles, who had no political or government experiences, and Biden, who is a very famous senator and vice president. He has behind him more than 50 years of experience. And with his personality and the way he talks and deals with the world issues. So this is the source of the basis of my optimism. But, you know, it is a big burden. I know, I have to confess, it is a big burden, but at least we have a better man here if he takes office. Now we go back to the issue of multilateralism. In one important issue, you mentioned it, my dear friend, which is education. In 1990, UNESCO organized a conference in Jomtien in Thailand for education for all. And ISESCO participated in that conference. and financed some of its actions and activities. And we joined hands with UNESCO since then in all the other activities that came after Jomtien. The goal of that program was to eradicate illiteracy. And one of the Millennium Goals was eradication of illiteracy by the year 2020, which is this year. Unfortunately, because of the lack of funds, the lack of cooperation, because of wars and conflicts that made people flee their countries and live in refugee camps and let their life turn to be miserable, illiteracy is increasing, it is not eradicated. And it is now reaching an alarming level in the whole world, especially in Africa and Asia and Latin America and Arab countries, like in Yemen, in Libya, in Syria, in Iraq, in other parts of the Arab countries that have suffered conflicts and wars, Somalia and some other places. So multilateralism in this important field has to be stronger, and we have to energize our activities and our cooperation to make sure that education is spread all over the world. Education is a base for development, for enlightenment. Extremism and terrorism and all the ugly manifestations of ignorance come in such an environment, and it grows in such an environment. And if we don't make sure that these environments are completely changed and people are able to go to schools and learn good education, not only just basic education, but good education that will make them productive in their societies, helpful to their country's economies, and also contributors to world peace and security through the intellectuality and open-mindedness and tolerance of other cultures and other religions. Without this, it is difficult to make sure that this problem will be solved. This is number one. Number two, the United Nations is an importance and a necessity for the world and for the world interactions between its governments and its leaders. But it has to be energized. It has to be changed. Its system has to be corrected. And it has to have certain power to enforce the decisions that are taken to save humanity from all the miseries that we have witnessed during the past 3 or 4 decades. I am really worried that the United Nations, because of its incapacity and inability to fulfill its duty and to be the guarantor of peace and security in the world, it will gradually deteriorate in a way or another and leave its responsibility to other groupings, regional groupings that might take their place, its place in some other parts of the world, like the G20, the G7, and some other groups that are created. We cannot let the United Nations die. It is a dream that has come true with all its fallacies and mistakes and shortcomings, but we have to make it live and become strong and work for its main objective, and that's to maintain peace and security in the world and to continue the groupings of the countries of the world and the leaders of the world to cooperate for the benefit of humanity, for the benefit of the nations of the world in all the different fields that have been created under the umbrella of the United Nations: education, health, science, environment, housing, everything that deals with the basic needs of humans and that are important for their existence. Without this, the United Nations will be just a big elephant, beautiful in its shape and name, but within it, there is nothing. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Valdis, I think it's now your turn to give us some directions.
So our discussion was a very interesting one. And that means, we have matured as an organization, as a brainstorming organization, and say a little bit of think tank. So just again, ask some questions, because if you don't ask questions, you don't get answers. So Rovshan always asks me what we as an organization can do. Okay, we can't, let's say, reorganize the United Nations, but we can create an opinion in a large scale of different countries and societies and different countries and leaders of different countries. But the question is not what we can do, the question is how we can do. And I think this is a time when we can rethink the principles of our actions. And the principles are very important ones, because let's say the thoughts may be very different ones. Even the actions may be different ones. But if they are based on the same principles, we understand each other very well, and the others will understand very well us as an organization. So I think the underestimated perception of human people of the rest of the world is the sense of fairness. Because all the trouble, you know, arises from when people think that it's unfair how they are treated by their governments or by their neighbors or by the superpowers. It doesn't matter. But if the sense of unfairness arises in societies, we are in trouble. How we can avoid that? Very simple principles which I propose, and if you agree, then maybe we can implement them. No double standards. That means, you know, tell always the truth, even the truth is not, you know, very present to your ears, because then much more people will listen to us, and much more people will trust us. And always we have to show that we are ready to listen to very different opinions, and always listen and try to understand. Because it's much better to understand than just say, this is not ours. We are not accepting, you know, we just keep distance from these actions. So let's say, this is a very human task. But nowadays, when the world is changing because of different reasons, we have to focus on regions. Because up to now, we were focusing on big powers. We had a meeting in New York, we had meetings in China. We're trying to, you know, to somehow to play with the big players, but as I said before, big players are not standing on the real ground yet. And they are, you know, in very, very difficult relations between each other. But we can focus on regions because, as I said in my previous intervention, regional implementation of multilateralism and cooperation. And really like what somebody said here, you know, that it's possible in Africa, in some parts of Africa, it's possible in Asia, in some parts. Let's be a part of this game. Because we can, you know, transfer for the good practices and good practices experience to another region. That's what I always say. When I talk about Karabakh, I always mention, you know, Bosnia, you know, because you have some experience, you know. The situations are not similar. They are just a little bit alike, but always different. So I would like to ask everybody, you know, to keep our company as strong as we are ourselves, get new people in, and then try to really talk about the regional problems and how we can implement the global problems at first regionally. And of course, you know, Caucasus is the biggest challenge. It's the biggest challenge, you know, but if everybody says it's the biggest challenge and does nothing, you know, then the status quo will be for a long time. And we have to understand that the bureaucrats of all the world, it's not like a proletariat of all the world unite, working people, all the bureaucrats are the same animals. They listen to you, they are very happy for new ideas, then they have this discussion, and then they say, it's better to keep status quo. We must be the organization that really breaks the status quo. Otherwise, we can't get through and come to an upgrade situation, whatever the organization it is, even including United Nations. Because I agree with all these speakers who said in the General Assembly, in a person of groups of regional associations of countries, must act. Otherwise, you know, the 5 Security Council members will veto everything good idea we have. I wish you everybody, you know, a good success, a nice day, and whatever, nice weather, you know, and especially good mood and optimism. I especially like Abdulaziz's optimism, you know, because I'm optimist myself, but sometimes I say I'm very pessimistic what I see today. But I'm optimistic about it tomorrow.
Thank you, Valdis. Moushira, you would like to say a few words before we close?
One word to say I'm greatly honored to be part of this group. And if we keep on brainstorming, I'm sure the world will be a better place. Thank you very much for including me, and I hope we will continue the conversation.
Definitely. Thank you, Moushira, very much. We have in here expression, inshallah, and if we do everything we can do.
Inshallah, inshallah, inshallah.
Inshallah, but you have to be the best version of yourself, because they will go, you're not going to be granted by inshallah if you don't do what you can do and we should do. That's what
we continue.
Yes,
my grandmother. Our conversation.
Yes, my grandmother was teaching me that. I mean, always say inshallah, but don't forget to do yourself what you can do. So I mean, otherwise, just forget it. So
you do it with inshallah.
You do it with inshallah. See, but you do it. You have to do it.
That's right.
You have to be driven by the force of your values, your beliefs. Yes. And in that case, you have chance to be realistically optimist. If you are not driven by a certain set of values, then definitely you are not going to succeed. But that's another story. Rovshan, could you take us some words before we just close this? And because I know all of you are really having other obligations taken before. So Rovshan, please.
Thank you so much for everyone for joining, because some of you already being part of all the conferences. Before Zlatko told that I am one of the person who is most participating, but I'm the one who is participating at every single discussion. It's our kind of third line of discussion on UN and how United Nations is adapting, or how United Nations is responding to the COVID-19 or to the multilateral crisis. And with Trump administration and with COVID-19 and also with Nagorno-Karabakh conflict, the ceasefire, and we saw that the United Nations is not incapacitated because the Security Council is not giving a power to the Secretary General. But I think that as Ambassador Moushira Khattab said, we have to continue to discussions, and as many times we are going to bring up like-minded people, and because like-minded people are going to bring up, great ideas, and maybe sometime it's going to be helpful, like President Zatlers said. You remember, Mr. President, we've been how many times? Last year we've been trying to meet President of China, but in 1 year, in 1 month, we met already 2 or 3 times him, and that's why you have to keep up your activities. And we have a good asset, and we have a good like-minded people, and a good brand, and I think that it's going to be helpful.
Well, Rovshan, thank you very much. I mean, just to conclude with this, thank you really, all of you, very much. Ambassador Khattab, Francis, my dear friend, of course, Abdulaziz, and Valdis. I mean, without saying anything, I'm thanking you. I mean, as always, I'm getting smarter every time when I talk in a platform that is related to NGIC. I think we all agree that NGIC, based on our mission, that is rooted in Nizami Ganjavi philosophy and his approach to the world, to the people, to the future, that we are, as NGIC, are committed to continue with dialogue, with respect, and by learning and understanding what is happening around us. Having said so, I think it is very important to understand that NGIC will, and as we all agree, that NGIC is trying to become some kind of platform that will attract the people based on those principles of dialogue, tolerance, learning, and understanding, in order to create some kind of alliance of like-minded people, like-minded entities, like-minded organizations, call it however you want to, and we can continue of being so. And there is no magic, there is no one silver bullet, there is no person in the world, regardless of how strong his country or her country is, that can destroy the world if everyone is united on the right side. As well as there is no one person, how mighty person on this world is, that can lead us all together to the promised land if we don't do our part of the job. So that's the reason why we have to keep working together, sharing the same set of values along the side of the mission of NGIC as a global initiative. And we are becoming more and more global initiative. And I think, Valdis, it's very important when we talk about this globe. I think you very, very rightly pointed out this need for bigger presence on regional cooperation. Because after all, there's no Star Wars. All wars are very regional. I mean, and on the end, everything scales down to be regional conflict, regardless of the fact that players from all over the world are actually putting fire on those conflicts. But basically speaking, regional cooperation has no alternative, and more regions are regionally cooperating better for all of us. So I think it is a very good point. And finally, why I'm very optimistic, because back in 14th century, about 450 million people lived on the planet, and Black Death terminated almost 40% of people at that time. In Florence, more than 65% of the people, 120,000 inhabitants of that was mega city. Florence was mega city of that time. 120,000 people lived in Florence, more than 2/3 were passed away as a result of Black Death, as a plague. So Florence became the cradle of Renaissance. And I think we can speed up use this COVID pandemic to wake up, to see that as a nature's almighty force signal to all of us, that we have to be more together and get out of this Black Death with some kind of new renaissance that will be followed by an enlightenment, and then go on and go on. So in that sense, I really do thank you, all of you, very much for being here today. I put a lot of notes in my black book because I heard so many interesting ideas, and I was not keeping them because I wasn't putting them down because
share with us.
You said
You will share with us.
Thank you so much. Yes, we will. And Rovshan, of course, thank you very much. I mean, for putting us together. And I think this is one of the events that we finished on time. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.